Right. Okay, so David's going to run through it. Again, this is 1,000 American registered voters. Some of the questions they answered before they had watched the 11-minute video, and then they could only go forward with the survey after watching the video. Now, of course, they could have put it on mute or read a book or whatever, but presumably most of them actually
Right.
watched the exchange. So, David, go ahead, share your screen and run people through the questions.
All right, great. Hold on. Okay, Mark, you seeing the screen?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's run through it. All right, so let's go through the first part of this. And this is where, prior to watching the video of that, incredible exchange between Trump and Zelensky and Vance, we asked registered voters some baseline questions about the key figures that, were in the room and some other ones, and then also on the conflict in general. So, what we found out prior to them watching the video was, generally speaking, America thinks that Ukraine needs to negotiate an end to the war. So, when they were asked to choose between continuing fighting till they win the war and negotiating an end to the war as soon as possible, 55.1% said negotiating an end to the war, and only 30.8% said they continue fighting till they win. Um, and again, this is all relevant once we actually get into the response when they actually watch the video. So America also agreed that Ukraine would need to make some territorial concessions in order to end the war, with 50% saying they should. They agree. Americans agreed that they should, and then also 30.9% saying that they disagreed. And so 19.1 did say that they were not sure. So moving on, and again, this is all prior to watching the video. But Zelensky's image, I think this is very important as we get into the next section here. So Zelensky's image rating is higher than Trump, Vance, or Biden. So when you look at the amount of people that have a favorable or somewhat favorable opinion of him versus those that have a unfavorable, somewhat or very unfavorable, his opinion is rating is much higher than Trump, Vance, Biden, and certainly much higher than Putin. So when we look at the people who are about to watch this video that we're exposing them to, the whole 10-minute clip, this is not a pro-Russia audience. This is not a, pro-Trump audience. This is just, registered Americans and where they are on the issues right now.
And
Um,
again, the light and the dark green represent the favorable, the
mhm.
light and dark orange represent the negative. So you can see Zelensky is the most popular of the people you tested, more popular than Putin, Trump, Vance, and Joe Biden, and by a decent amount. And you can see, Trump is a little more favorable than Vance, but as you pointed out, people don't have a high negative view of Zelensky.
Right. And I think that if you looked at the bottom three rows here, this is very consistent. We did this survey obviously very fast, as you pointed out earlier. This is very consistent with everyone's reporting on a national level. So you
Yeah.
really got to look at the top two rows here and see the contrast between one, Zelensky and Putin, but also the contrast between Zelensky and all the other American leaders. Like this is, we're not going into a situation where this is a very pro-Russia or pro anything
Right.
Republican audience.
Right.
So there's some interesting insights that are going to come from this.
Right. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so these are the questions that were asked from the audience, including a couple others, prior to exposing them to that 10-minute video, right? So the next thing we did was we said, hey, watch. We made every person in the survey, they had to watch the entire 10 to 11-minute video, and we asked them questions about it. So the first thing we asked was, do you approve? How, I mean, at what level do you approve or disapprove of Trump, Vance, and Zelensky and how they handled themselves in the meeting? And so this actually measures, very similar to what you kind of saw in the favorability question prior to the video, that Zelensky actually was his net approval for how he handled himself in that meeting was higher. Um, but as we move forward and we ask more specifics about, for example, one of the big conflicts in the video, and they had just watched this video, right? One of the conflicts between the parties was that Trump and Vance argued for compromise and diplomacy with Russia to end the war, and Zelensky, on the other hand, made these points that there was not room for compromise and questioned diplomacy based on the history of trying to do diplomacy with Russia. So, this is right after they've watched the video, and we ask, which side do you think had the stronger argument in this part of that video, that clip? And obviously you can see that the registered voters who answered the survey said that Trump and Vance had a stronger argument in that. So moving on to one of the other key moments in the clip that they all just had watched was President Trump took offense, I mean, as everyone saw in the video, when Zelensky made the point that America has a big ocean between it and this conflict, but America would eventually feel it in the future. And obviously Trump and Vance took offense to that. And so we asked America after they had watched that part of the video, what did they think? And 62%, at least 60% said it was at least slightly, somewhat, or very offensive. And only 37.7% said it was not at all offensive.
Significant because, again, as we've said, they had the largely favorable Zelensky,
Yes.
and yet they still found that he was offensive.
Right. I think this is interesting, and I'd love to hear Dan and Sean talk about this on Monday. It's just this thing is these real events are happening that people are watching, and sometimes the reaction to it is not really following on the party lines that you would expect it to. So moving on to the next one, we did ask, among many other things, Mark, that we can put out later, is we ask, after watching the video, did you think that Trump and Vance seem authentic in their desire for peace? And 49.3% said yes, and 41.5% said no. When that does track a little bit more favorably than Trump and Vance's general image amongst the American voting public. So I do think that that's important when you look at this key moment that happened and how the America responded, to Trump and Vance in this. I think this is, it's only 8 points, but it does matter because typically things are much more divisive and right on party lines. And again, this is from an audience that is not certainly not pro-Russia or pro-Trump. They actually had a more favorable opinion of Zelensky and probably Ukraine than any other figure we're measuring. So this is one we asked also at the end of it, and it says, who has the negotiation leverage concerning the future of the conflict? So the actual question was, generally speaking, who do you think has the most negotiating leverage in the relationship between Ukraine and the United States concerning the future of the Ukraine-Russia conflict? And this is a pretty loud number here. So there's not many people who are watching this interaction and think that Ukraine is in a position of power in that Oval Meeting office, is what I would take from this slide here. So last thing, Mark, and we'll wrap it up, is after we asked those questions, we exposed the survey respondents and asked them to read Donald Trump's statement, his official statement that he tweeted out, or he sent out on Truth, I guess. And we asked, how did you feel, how would you rate his statement after this Oval meeting? And obviously you can read the statement there. And I do think that there's some pretty loud numbers here that it was not very negative. So this is, as much as people may read on it, and we'll figure out how public opinion reacts to this later on. But what we're looking at here, Mark, is we're looking at when people actually watch this interaction between all of them and they look at this tweet, how are real Americans, reacting to it if they actually get to see it. And you can see right here, there are some pretty loud numbers there.
Yeah. So, David, I don't know if you can go back about 6 slides, but with the exception of the question of how people handled themselves, where Zelensky did okay, I think it's maybe one more back. Is this one?
Yep.
How they handled themselves. So Zelensky does pretty well here, right? But this is really the only question about sort of asking people to choose between Trump and Zelensky, where he does better. And I don't find it to be in conflict with the other answers. I handled themselves in the meeting. He handled himself. He was kind of it was an away game for him. So I think people may be saying, well, he was in a difficult situation. But again, just go through the slides again, and we'll just summarize here one by one. So I
think we can start here. Actually, it's a good place to start because again, we start out with again, America is largely much more pro-Ukraine, as you can see here. I mean, by virtue of the fact that we're looking at the leaders of Ukraine and Russia than they are Russia. And even, they have a higher, opinion rating of Zelensky than they do have any American leaders.
Right.
And so this is that kind of sets the stage for the audience here. And I think that you can split things up into two categories is, the fact that maybe Zelensky may have lost on his points, maybe lost on the facts or on the issues that he was arguing, doesn't mean that he presented himself as egregious as maybe some of the media's. I'm not trying to put words in the media's mouth, but like maybe, that narrative is not quite accurate. And I think that's
Right.
a big point for this slide here. Like people actually don't think he was, you know, uh, too egregious or too confrontational or too, um,
Yeah.
you know,
And yet going forward, just take through them one by one. We'll just summarize them. So people think that the president of the United States has a stronger argument on the diplomacy questions,
right.
right? Right. So that's
Right. So
number
that was a big
one.
part of the conflict. And, and
Yeah.
again, they had just watched that. They had just watched the
Right.
whole thing. When they were
Right.
asked about that, they generally said, yeah, no, they won on the points there.
Right. Okay. So
And
next is, was he offensive? Yes, they did think he was offensive. And again, that's the point of view of MAGA. That's the point of view of the president and his team. Not necessarily the point of view of Europeans, maybe. But
right.
so again, Zelensky comes out on the short end here. Next.
It's like,
Uh, Again, they credit the president and the vice president for being authentic in their desire for peace, something Zelensky may or may not agree with, but it's certainly that's another positive for the president. Next, again, overwhelmingly belief that the U.S. side has more leverage in the negotiating on the conflict. Next, and very favorable view of the president's statement that he put out afterwards, kind of putting his gloss on what happened. So